Welcome to the SpartanMag.com VCast. Jim Comparoni, Paul Konyndyk. Spartan Stadium, Michigan State, 16-10. Eked out a victory over Florida Atlantic. Kicking off Labor Day weekend, kicking off the season, kicking off the Jonathan Smith era at Michigan State. It was looking pretty good there for Michigan State for a while. It looked like it was going to be like a slow burn blowout. Then you guys saw what happened. It ended up being really sticky down the end. And Michigan State's pass rush and their defense ended up securing victory. Coverage was very good in the defensive secondary for the most part. Had a bust on the fourth down touchdown. But we'll talk about all those things and the positives and the negatives about this victory. Aidan Chiles struggled. He volunteered to take blame for the offensive struggles. It's not all on him, but he had a kind of a difficult debut at Michigan State. Overall, we'll talk about the crowd. We'll talk about everything. In the meantime, give us a thumbs up here. Give us a like in this channel. Subscribe to this channel. We appreciate you checking us out. Also, go to SpartanMag.com. Become a SpartanMag.com subscriber. We would love to have you over there. But right now, we got Paul Konyndyk, Associate Editor, SpartanMag.com. He's ready to talk. What's going on, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, tonight was a reminder that Aiden Chiles is 18 years old. I mean,
well said.
The talking season throughout there, whatever was said on about whatever ranked transfer he is, the guy's got a ton of talent. He's got a ton of physical talent. He plays in an offense that really, I think, will take advantage of that once the running game is rolling. But he's 18 years old. When he said last week, I was on a college visit with my daughter when he said this, but he was talking about betting the over. I'm like, oh crap! That to me was a reminder that he's 18 years old. And I think of all the other times that Murphy's Law stuff that you and I both believe in, when guys come out and say, talk big, for the most part, and they don't have a whole lot of experience. You put yourself in a situation, and I'm not saying that this was because he said bet the over, but I'm just saying that's one of those things that someone that had more experience wouldn't say. And he's got a lot of youthful enthusiasm. I thought tonight he was a little at the podium. He was obviously disappointed with himself, but I think he could use a little bit more statecraft in the way he handles that tonight. I know he was pretty hot, and he's disappointed, but
I liked it. It was genuine.
I mean, it was genuine, but I think he's got to manage himself a little bit better, and that's something that you learn. But I'm also, I'm bullish on his future, and I would hesitate. There's going to be a ton of overreaction because people hyped him up so much, and that's what we do in sports. People get hyped up a ton, and then as soon as you see something you don't like, you get knocked off that pedestal. And he experienced what it's like to be a starting quarterback in the Big Ten. Now, they played a Florida Atlantic team. It wasn't a Big Ten game, but there's a ton of pressure that comes with this job, and you could see it from the first play of the game, the interception. That was tough to overcome, and I didn't
think that was a bad ball.
I don't think it was his fault necessarily.
It's just one of those pinball
things.
It
was a thing that happens in football.
I'm surprised that replay officials ruled that an interception. Secondly.
Yeah, and I go back to what you've said time and time again. When you slow it down and you can go frame by frame,
they think it's possession when it's not possession.
But in the NFL, it's the opposite. You ever notice that? In the NFL, possession's never possession. College possession, but in college, as soon as there's any kind of if there's a 25% chance it might be possession, they say it's possession. I was surprised that it was overruled, but I'm just saying in general, that was kind of a tough thing to overcome.
I feel like I need the replay booth is down here somewhere, and when they're replaying stuff, I feel like I need to go down the hallway and say, "Hey, man, if it's slow motion, it doesn't mean he caught the ball."
But you realize the guys that do the replay are former officials that are too old to be on the field. So lots of times they get pissed off that guys down on the field aren't as good as they think they are, so they want to one-up them. It's human nature. I'm a huge believer in human nature. Yeah. I was raised in an evangelical household.
Wow.
The whole original sin crap and all that stuff. That human nature thing has been ingrained into me since I was a kid. That if human nature is going to fail, it's going to fail.
Paul's going deep.
Yeah, it's not.
So they ruled that one an interception.
But then the one that really hurt Aiden Chiles was that goal line. I mean, that was you and I could see it. It was I don't care how good your arm is, you don't throw that ball.
I guess I don't know. Yeah, it was like Lawrence Taylor on Thanksgiving Day back in the '80s.
But that was one of those plays in the NFL. You're like, okay, this is a pick six, and it was just a little bit of hubris. And that's another thing where Jonathan Smith said afterwards that he thinks that Aiden Chiles made the wrong read, or read the coverage wrong, not the wrong read. The read is it's a one-on-one type of situation, but he made the wrong coverage read, and
it's a risky throw.
And it's not. I don't care if he would have scored. If that would have been a touchdown. We've seen those kind of plays. We've seen a couple of those Keon Coleman plays where he came down in a 50-50 type situation, which was more like a 75-25. It's still the wrong play for the quarterback, even if it works. And in that instance, I'm not, that's one that chalk it up to growing, but that's the one that hurt him the most in this game, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I'm not sure. Jonathan Smith said he didn't. He thought he read it wrong or whatever. I'm not sure. And Chiles explained. And Chiles explained that if the DB goes behind it, then he's allowed to throw that. But I don't know. In the future for the right hash over there on that thin plane of that throw, I wonder if in the future Chiles doesn't even look at that very long. I don't know.
It was in the air forever.
Smith said, he was, that didn't turn out well, of course, but Smith was bothered that on first down they didn't get much on the ground. And all night, Michigan State could not really rely on their ground. They ended up rushing for 179, which is a pretty good figure. Had 63 of them came on that one play, which is a really well-executed trap. First time they ran that trap all night, busted it through there. Lynch Adams looked real good, rushing for over 100 yards. But, through the course of the game, Nathan Carter was held to about 2.5 yards per carry.
Some of that wasn't his fault.
Yeah, and the run game just was not consistently solid, especially that 4th and 1 situation when Michigan State was up by 6, had a chance to kick a field goal to go up 2 scores with 8 minutes to go, decided to go for it. Jonathan Smith said after the game that that was maybe overly aggressive. He says that he preaches to his team all the time, we're going to be aggressive. Touchdowns are worth more than field goals. He didn't say this, but a lot of people believe teams that kick field goals get beat. Well, that situation, as Smith said, hindsight being 20/20, they would have went the other way on that. You and I were talking about it before that play, and a lot of other people were afterwards. And as it turned out, having the 9-point lead coming down the stretch would have made things a lot different and felt a lot different, especially a game in which Michigan State was not having consistent success with the ground game, thinking they could pick that up 4th and 1, give them credit for being aggressive and having optimism, but didn't turn out well on that one. Ended up not costing them a victory, but that would have been an expensive one.
Yeah, and that front 7 for Florida Atlantic is really good. Their linebackers and the defensive line are good. So, if it's pretty good. It's different. I know what he's thinking. I mean, he's thinking, like we talk about, well, that 185 or 179 or whatever it was that they had on the ground isn't like a real 179. It is a real 179. It's the fact that on a lot of the blocking plays, one guy is off just by a little bit. And, and so they're seeing plays that work, and they're seeing plays that, maybe don't work as well. And they're feeling like, well, if this is blocked up right, it's going to work. And I understand what they're trying to do, because that offensive line that they had last year at Oregon State, and those guys had a lot of veterans on there, that would have been a play where you give those guys with that operation, that veteran offensive line, that you trust that they're going to make it. But this is still a work in progress for Michigan State, and you've got a lot of guys playing in their first game in this offense against a front 7 that, that played pretty well, even on a couple of the short yardage runs that Michigan State did pick up a first down on in this game. They were really close, and but they those linebackers are really good linebackers, and maybe as the season unfolds, as guys start to gel, maybe you go for that. I definitely don't think it'd be a problem if you're Oregon State last year, but they're not Oregon State last year. They're Michigan State, and they're still kind of learning about themselves and still growing within this offense, and that's risky. I don't begrudge them doing that. But I'd also wonder, like, okay, quarterback sneak, maybe. You get a big athletic quarterback, maybe you do it that way.
Earlier in the game, Michigan State went for it on 4th down and I think got a favorable spot. I think they were stopped on that one as well. That was out of shotgun, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking of when I said some of the short yardage gains in the first half or earlier in the game. I mean, they were close, but you had good linebackers, and I think, this offensive line, offensive line rotated more guys than I thought they would in this game, and
when Brocious was in there a little bit, and Stanton Ramil was in there. Anyone else? Did they just go too deep?
I can't.
Just those two players.
But it felt like with tight ends rotating as much as they did, we saw a lot of guys.
And on the 4th down stoppage, it looked like the penetration came in untouched from the tight end side. People were talking about Baldwin. I'll have to look at it again, but it looked like sometimes you don't know which jersey you're supposed to block. That becomes a miscommunication. I thought you had him. You thought I had him. Right. The guy goes untouched. I don't think anyone got flattened. I don't think anyone gave up, got dented on the play.
And there was some good tight end blocking over. I mean, if you want to compare what Michigan State did last year with tight end blocking, compared to this year, there is a lot of growth on there. But there's still a lot of moving parts, and this is a new thing for a lot of guys doing it in games. And we'll see what happens moving forward. But that was a tough play for Michigan State.
Smith said that in the first game you're going to learn a lot about your team, and Michigan State's coaches are still learning about their team. They think they know what they have in the offensive line and run game when they go against their own defense. So they probably had optimism in what they could do, but you come out of this after 60 minutes and you realize our run game is not where it needs to be. That's what Smith said. But even the coaches don't know that for sure until they throw it out there on the field against another opponent. So they learned as they went. They may have thought that the run game was ahead of where it showed tonight.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't know, like, when you have a defense like Michigan State's defensive line is way better than I thought it was.
Yeah.
I mean, they played really good. So
yes.
When you're going up against those guys in practice, you're trying to make calculations on, okay, like what happens with my run game if I go up against an average defense or that type of thing. And, because I think these coaches, there's a quiet confidence throughout camp about the Michigan State defense. They knew they were going to be pretty good. So then as an offense, you're trying to figure out, okay, what does this look like when I go up against a pedestrian defense or an average defense or a defense that's kind of one-dimensional. And, I think even a defense that's one-dimensional or isn't quite as good like FAU, it's still a defense that probably is going to give you problems in the first game because everyone says that like the offensive line doesn't really start to gel until game 3 or whatever. At least in the first game, there's a lot of like basic stuff that doesn't necessarily fit quite right.
One of these times I'm going to be writing something like this, and I'm going to turn around and I will have drawn a caricature of you.
Yeah.
That'd be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't give a shit. I don't give a crap. Hey, you going to plug Shoe Pan a little bit?
Yeah.
All right.
Right when we almost drop an S-bomb, let's go ahead and plug our sponsor, right? Let's see what we got here. There it is. All right. Did you know, Paul?
I did.
All right, that just a few years ago, the state of Michigan ranked first in the nation for deposit container recycling. 90% of purchased bottles and cans were being redeemed for their deposits at that time. Today, only 73% in the state of Michigan are being redeemed. That means Michiganders are forfeiting $105 million every year in bottle and can deposits that are not being redeemed. It's bad for the environment. It's bad for your pocketbook. So we're talking about take it back. Take them back. Michigan's deposit system creates the cleanest recycling material for the beverage industry to make new cans and new bottles, and it reduces the environmental impact of creating new cans and new bottles. When Michigan's recycling rate drops, it hurts the environment, it hurts industry, and it hurts all of us. Help the environment, help your state, help yourself. Take them back. They're your lakes, your roads, your beaches, and it's your dime. So take them back. It's worth your time, and everyone will benefit. Take them back. A message from Shoe Pan, a great Michigan company dedicated to recycling and dedicated to the Michigan State Spartans. Michigan State Spartans 1-0 going to Maryland next week. Big Ten season kicking off. We'll be covering that all next week. As far as what happened today, a little bit more of this. Defense. The defense was better. Rotating those defensive players. I counted, I think, 24 defensive players played in the first half. They went into the 3 deep. Tatum gets hurt. Somebody said he was on crutches. Smith didn't give any updates on him. Malik Spencer out for targeting. So you're playing the rest of the game with Nikai Martinez, who played real well. Had a nice shoestring tackle on third down. Had an interception return for 41 yards, which set up a touchdown. Nikai Martinez played well. Angelo Gross back there at safety had a nice game, including an interception and a physical tackle on a third down scramble just before a fourth down stoppage. So those are your 2 safeties. But Gross had been playing some nickel, and Tatum had been playing some nickel. So who's your nickel when those 2 guys are out? Turned out it was Avion Gross, and I did not have him on the bingo card as being a guy that would be in the rotation, much less be playing nickel at crunch time. Didn't see Armorion Smith. Not sure what's going on there.
Well, obviously, Armorion Smith. I mean, you guys, a lot of you know the backstory. His mom passed away recently, so he's been going through some tough things personally. So I'm not sure, where he is with that, but.
Blue Adams has indicated he's been showing up and working and practicing and all those things. I don't know if I saw him on the field, but anyway, so Avion Gross is out there, and if I were Florida Atlantic, I would have been going after number 30, but they didn't really. Maybe they didn't have time to. Michigan State's pass rush, 7 sacks, and would have been an 8th at the end, but the guy flipped it. The pass rush is what saved the day for Michigan State.
I mean, the only thing that
I didn't see that coming.
The only thing that FAU had going on offense, pretty much, was the quarterback run. I mean, they could, like, even when they ran conventionally, I think maybe the longest they got was maybe a 7-yarder, and that was like window dressing. That was set up to like a fake where it was looking like the quarterback was going to run it, and then they gave it to a running back. But the only thing they really had to hang their hat on was that quarterback run, and Like Fancher, if you look at him statistically in his career, he threw 25 picks at Marshall. So as good as he is, he's got some arm talent, but as good as he is running the football, you do not want him making decisions under duress. That's been a real big issue for him, and it was today as well. Michigan State had 2 picks, and they were of the duress type, where he saw a little bit of pressure and he kind of panicked. But you don't want him doing a lot as far as making reads and trying to get past that first read. And they gave him a game plan that they thought would be successful against Michigan State. And I don't know if he's going to play. I don't know what happened to his hand at the end. It looked to me like he broke his hand. I'm not sure if he was playing for a Big Ten team, if he got hit as much. I can't imagine. Like concussion, I would have been concerned with as much as he got hit up top, and he looked shell-shocked at times.
It affected him.
As it does, man. You can't go through. I don't care how good a quarterback you are. If you get hit as much as he did today, it's gonna affect you, and that's the most consistent pressure I've seen with Michigan State since the D'Antonio era. Yeah. Just like consistently solid, fundamentally sound pressure, where it wasn't just a guy busting through, and it was. They really didn't over-pursue. You know what I'm saying? You had guys getting pressure on him, but there wasn't situations where once the pressure, if it didn't get him, he was going to bust out and scramble for 30. It wasn't like some of the stuff we saw during the Tucker era, where you'd have a guy like Beasley come in and make some sacks once in a while, but if it got out, it was getting out. Yeah. This is like fundamentally sound. We're going to build a fence around him. We're going to have one guy go after him, and if that guy doesn't get him, we're going to get him for a 2 or 3 yard gain. So it looked uber aggressive, but it wasn't necessarily uber aggressive. I think they were very smart in how they pressured him. Build a fence and send one guy loose at him.
There was always leverage around the ball. There was always help. It didn't seem like they were on thin ice very often. Coverage was good. Ed Woods looked good at corner, played a little bit more than Chance Rucker, I think, and Brantley looked pretty good. Brantley had that receiver stacked up on that deep interception to Nikai Martinez. And the coverages, there's changing coverages. I like to watch coverages and take notes on. And I have trouble identifying what a lot of those coverages are. Even a few beats into it, I would need to rewind it, and you can't rewind anything when it's live. So they're confusing me up here with some of those things. Played man-to-man, got a sack late, then late went zone like when Angelo Gross had that heavy tackle that we talked about a moment ago. He's in zone. And it looked like that quarterback was getting loose there for a moment, but zone defense keeps an eye on the backfield, and it does not allow scrambles to get out as readily. And a minute earlier, there was man-to-man. So Fancher's having to make reads, and he's getting heat on him. The coverage is pretty good, and there are different types of zone coverages, too. They're changing the hieroglyphics on that. I think that's a really nice sign for Michigan State defense, not only for the rest of the season, but into the future. The defense, well orchestrated. They had the one bust on the touchdown on 4th down. The receiver ran a crack and go, and they let him go free for a touchdown. 2 plays prior to that, they had a sneak late release on a tight end, and Cal Halliday saw it all the way, broke it up for an incompletion. That was like a trick late release. Michigan State didn't bite. So they were good all day, and then that one, they give up a touchdown on 4th down to FAU's credit, and they cut it to a 6-point game. But overall, coverage was good. Coverage was varied. And that the pressure. All right, Daquan Dowse gets that sack early in the game for a 2-0 lead. Slant, penetrate, sack. That's part of the one-gapping scheme. Nothing wrong with two-gapping. There's, Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, some of those teams do a little bit of both. Two-gapping is great if you got horses that can do it and so forth. Michigan State just happens to want to be a one-gapping team like Narduzzi's team used to be. And those type of plays are what they talked to us about in the spring. The Michigan State players were excited to play this style because it's aggressive, making plays in the backfield, and we saw that today with that sack, crossing face, getting into gaps. Cal Halliday had a tackle for loss, shooting a gap, which never would happen last year. Halliday's a pretty good player, but in the two-gapping read-react system, might not have been his kettle of fish, especially 10 pounds heavier. And I still say that last year, in retrospect, hindsight being 2020, it was analysis to paralysis with some of those guys, like Ben Van Zumeren, not sure what to do to the point where they don't do anything. And that was a guy that had talent that never showed it in that scheme. But now you're seeing Halliday make some plays. Daquan Dowse making plays, and there'll be more. And they play a lot of guys on defense. And I thought the freshness paid off for Michigan State late in the game that they played so many people.
Yeah, especially against a quarterback that's running around. I mean, the thing that really impressed me is you're talking about like in the first half how many guys they played on defense. Well, they sprinkled in liberally throughout, but a lot of it's like the mass substitutions on the defensive line. It was really impressive to me that they got guys in and out as quickly as they did, and the linebackers got guys lined up. So you can say, well, hey, they got the helmet type of thing. They know what's going on. When you're rotating guys in that late and stuff like that, and you've got that many guys coming in and going out, to me that speaks volumes of your operation. We heard about Joe Rossi being an attention to detail guy, but for a team that got as many 15-yard penalties, that's one of the weird things about this defensive performance. They got a ton of 15-yarders. Some of it unavoidable, some of it avoidable. But that kind of makes you think they had a lack of discipline on defense. Well, they showed a lot of discipline on defense in terms of substitution, guys coming in and out, and there wasn't a lot of, like you usually see substitution-type errors.
Right.
In that first game. We didn't see them in this game. And
they were decisive with those substitutions, and there was no, like, fire drill going on. They were
right.
It was like changing hockey lines.
And it wasn't like one of those deals where, oh, this guy doesn't make a play, so we're going to put some guys in. It's not reactionary substitutions. It's like a set substitution. Like you mentioned hockey. And so for them to have as few busts as they had, and guys knowing what to do and where to go, that speaks volumes of what we've heard about Joe Rossi, attention to detail
and communication. You could see the guys talking, and communication was spot on.
And guys were like really adamant. There was a couple times where like Cal Halliday was getting mad. I think he might have been getting mad at Angelo Grossi. He was supposed to blitz, and he didn't on one play. And then the next play, he got up in his face and he went and blitzed the next play, but. One of the things we also heard in the training camp about Joe Rossi was that, like he disguises things. He adds new wrinkles. Yeah. And so I think when you're going back to that one-gapping thing, that's kind of like easy. You can't have success as a one-gapping thing unless you have some other wrinkles to go with it. Yeah. I don't think it works well if you can be too simple. And I think they're simple so they can play fast, but you add in some of the coverage details and some of the different blitzes and whatnot, and that kind of complicates it for the offense. So you can be fast and play fast like they did during the D'Antonio era, but there's also some wrinkles that he brings to it, and I'm impressed with that.
Yeah, he says he wants to be simple so the guys can play fast. It didn't look simple to me. It looked pretty sophisticated, and it was varied, and they were sharp with it. There are a couple times when there's different types of zones. It'd be zone coverage, but I wasn't exactly sure if it was cover 2 or cover 6, and it was the coverages. Man, I got a kick out of that, and that bodes well for the future. Alex Van Sumeren gets a start at defensive tackle, makes some plays early, and I was saying a few weeks ago, I'm not sure this guy could either become the best defensive tackle on the team, or he could be third string. There was a wide variance. I wasn't sure what to expect. I thought it was all on the table. He starts, I think, in front of Maverick Hansen pretty much. Van Sumeren looked sturdy, and quick. So that was a plus for Michigan State. When you think Maverick Hansen if he's going to be a second stringer this year, that's a pretty good second stringer if it stays that way all year. The penalties, Ben Roberts had a hand to the face. Daquan Dowse grazed a face mask once when a guy was falling down. His hand was in the way. Some of those things are circumstantial and hard to get a handle on. Tatum made his 15-yarder. Not only was it a horse collar, but it was out of bounds. Right. That was maybe the one that lacked discipline a little bit. He was hurt on that play, so we wish him well. I don't want to speak for you. I certainly wish him well. Sure right. I don't want to be unprofessional about it, but when a young man gets hurt, we're thinking about him. Malik Spencer with the targeting. It was a targeting to the was it a head or was it an arm to the head? I don't know, but that one was probably overzealous, and he could have checked up on that a little bit more.
I thought, but some of them you can't. Like the Jordan Turner one late. I mean, he was in his tackle motion when the guy was sliding. But the one thing you can control if you're Jordan Turner, you can't tear your helmet off.
No.
Those are like the horse collar and the helmet thing. Yeah. Those can be avoided. Malik Spencer, I know his personality type. You know him. He just wanted to make a big play, and he got overly exuberant. But you take away those 3 penalties, and that's a big difference. And I was telling you a few minutes before we went on camera. I think of some of the Iowa defenses, that have been really good, but they've led the league in penalties, and some of that's just unavoidable type stuff. And you can get penalized as a defense and it's okay because you're playing aggressive and you're playing physical football, but you can't do stupid things like tearing your helmet off.
Yeah.
That's really dumb. And Jordan Turner, he'd be the first one to tell you that. And horse collar, dumb.
Yeah. I didn't think that this was like John L. Smith level of personal fouls. Like, man, that was just not smart. A couple of them were. But I doubt this is going to be an every week
No,
thing.
it reminds me of some of the D'Antonio teams that were extra physical, wanted to make a point with their physicality.
Yeah.
And you know, like you got to adjust to how the game is called. And against some teams, with some officials, maybe some of these wouldn't be called. But the fact that you've got a quarterback going into a slide all the time, and that's what it is. We've seen it before. I mean, we've seen this happen before, and some of it's unavoidable. But like those three that we just talked about, those three penalties that were avoidable, that's what you got to get rid of.
Right. As far as Chiles goes, there was one as Michigan State was trying to run the ball, 4-minute offense, and on a counter boot, 2nd down and 8. You know, had Velling wide open. Would have been an easy first down and might have altered the rest of the game. But he kind of stumbled coming out of his boot and then threw it at his feet, and Velling couldn't make that catch. Then 2 plays later, they're punting, and Michigan State's back on thin ice again. Just a simple play, like that's the type of play when Chiles talks about these are plays I make every day and I didn't make them today. Something like that, I think, can be a real weapon in this offense if they can get the ground game established. You saw Michigan State a lot today with some of that counter boot, faking it this way and then bringing it back this way and springing people open. Sometimes they weren't open, but they were putting pressure on the defense with some of those deep shots. Maybe they went deep too much. It's debatable, but it remains to be seen whether Chiles has deep ball accuracy. We hear that he does. We've not seen it demonstrated. But if he can harness a level of deep ball accuracy, that'll make this offense a lot more dangerous because when you're selling out to stop the run and then you get some counter boot, and it's hard to put pressure on a guy that runs as well as he does when he's moving outside the pocket. You got to chase that guy down, and he's faster than defensive lineman. He's got extra time to throw. Puts a lot of pressure on a defense theoretically. Didn't make the defense pay with those today. But if you are Maryland getting ready for Michigan State next week, there are some things there that are problematic.
Yeah, and it didn't help that Montoya Foster did not have a good game. You know, that's your number one receiver. You talk about that first play of the game. I thought Montoya Foster, he
could have caught that.
Yeah, he deflects it. And then there's another play where
he fumbles 2 possessions later.
Yeah, he fumbles on the one red zone trip. So that's your kind of go-to receiver.
And a deep one went through his fingertips one time.
Yeah, the one through
would have been tough.
The one through his fingertips, I'm not blaming that on Montoya Foster. That's one where Chiles has to put just a little bit more air underneath.
True.
Montoya Foster did a hell of a job catching up to that pass to get it on his fingers. So, and then a couple of deep ball later in the game, Chiles just way overthrew Montoya Foster. So, it's a work in progress with Montoya Foster. If he catches that first pass of the game, maybe it's different. I just feel too that Chiles is also trying to be different than he was last year in terms of he doesn't want to be a guy with happy feet. He wants to be a guy that sits in the pocket, and it's a process, that pocket awareness that you develop. I'll be interested to see how he performs next week, and I'm going to be interested to see what the offensive line does in terms of, can they get a little bit more consistent where it's not, you got some good big plays and you're capable of springing in a long run. I want to see like 5, 6, those type of things. That's when you're kind of start cooking with gas as an offensive line, when you're chunking out those 5-yard runs when people know that's what you're going to do.
Yeah, and this was good for Michigan State's offensive line to go against these guys. In the pre-snap read, I said that Florida Atlantic, probably their most proven, returning, dependable area is their defensive front, the defensive line, including the linebackers, the defensive front. And that matched up directly with Michigan State's biggest unknown. So that was a really good test for Michigan State to go against a respectable defensive front that I think would be like, bottom quarter of the Big Ten. I think it's a Big Ten level defensive front, defensive line and linebackers included. And Michigan State's offensive line had their hands full of those guys tonight. And they won some, they lost some. So Michigan State, it's different than playing Prairie View in game one, in that the offensive line saw how much work they have to do. How much better they can get from here is going to have a big impact on what the team can become long term this year.
And I thought Chiles did make some good passes. There were some, he had some really good passes at times, and it's
some
just
curls and comebacks.
It's just if you're Jonathan Smith, the thing that bothers you the most is them coming up empty in the red zone. Even
that slant that set up the 4th and short was a pretty nice one.
Right, and but I mean, they obviously led the country in red zone offense last year at Oregon State, and then to come out here and be 1 for 4.
And a big part of what they did in the red zone last year was Jack Velling, and we didn't see him in the red zone today.
Yeah, and Jack Velling, they had one nice pass to him, but a lot of the stuff when Jack Velling was in, people were, they're keying in on him, and Michael Masuna's got a couple nice passes and stuff like that. So it's going to be interesting to see. Jack Velling will make his presence felt in this offense.
Crowd was good tonight. It took them forever to get in the stadium because of the lightning situation. When you got to the stadium, did you see the students that were outside?
Yeah.
When I arrived about an hour before the game, and the students were lined up because of the lightning. They were not allowed. The students were not allowed in the stadium. I've never seen so many students all the way down toward the Sparty statue waiting to get in the game. By the second quarter, they still were coming to the game. They were not getting in yet. So by the time, maybe midway late in the second quarter, it was probably 95% full here. And the stripe out effect, whatever that's called, that looked pretty good. They were loud. Second half, State's up 16-0, and some people left. Like about 15% of the crowd left. Some of the students left. Even the regular stripe out people, whatever you call it, they left also. And Michigan State's crowd still was loud at the end, and Smith was appreciative of that, and he thought that they had an impact on the defense succeeding. But I was getting flashbacks to the year John L. Smith lost to Louisiana Tech.
Yeah, that was empty, though.
And it was hot that day. It was like 80 degrees. Michigan State was leading by 13, and it's like a boring 13-point lead. Louisiana Tech scores onside kick, goes down and scores. And John L. Smith at the end of the game, it was close to a sellout that day. By the end of the game, there might have been 40,000. And Smith was like, where'd everybody go? That's when we needed you. So some of the people did leave. The ones that showed up did a great job because it was looking like lightning and storm and so forth. Sold a lot of tickets. A lot of people were wondering what kind of crowd it would be. It was a good crowd. The lightning messed it up at the beginning, and then people left. So the ones that were here did a really great job.
Yeah, and I think, the defense did give them something to cheer about. I mean, people that have been around for a long time at Michigan State, we know that D'Antonio hung out his shingle on defense. And this kind of reminded me of like the Narduzzi, D'Antonio type games where, hey, if the offense isn't playing well or some guys are struggling, the defense can pick them up. And, like Joe Rossi earned his paycheck. For them, like we're talking about all off season about how many guys Michigan State lost. I mean, let's be honest. They lost a crap ton of talent on the defensive line. And for them to bring the guys they did, bring in, and you're like, several of those guys, I'm like, okay, you need a 300-pounder. Like Ben Roberts, you mentioned him with the hands to the face, but he played pretty dang good today, and to bring in a guy like that, Satchel.
He's in there, Jalen Satchel.
Anthony Jones coming in from Indiana.
Big fourth down sack he had when he stayed home on that counter boot.
But he had a lot of good plays out there today. And then to see what they've done with Chris Bogle, he was a beast. You were talking all off season about, hey, I wonder why Bogle is the starting Russian based on what we've seen in his career today. But now in this game, he looks like the guy that was ranked in the top 100 coming out of high school.
One-gapping scheme, stand-up edge. It's what he played in Florida early in his career when he was a productive player. The past 2 years, he battled some injuries and so forth. Didn't see much out of him, but also he didn't look that good in the spring scrimmage back here in April. So that's why I'm like.
But you're going like, what Joe Rossi said is, like a lot of that is you're learning that defense. And now he's a smart kid and he's playing on instinct. And some of those guys that were out there today are still in the situation he was in the spring. But not only did Chris Bogle he finished with 1.5 sacks, but he had also had a nice play on, where he dropped a guy for a 5-yard loss or a 1-yard loss, where he was coming off of, he's being blocked pretty well, released and made a big play. So it's not like he's just being a pass rush guy. He had a good game. I thought, Jalen Thompson, he was solid, but DeQuan Dowse really good. Dunnigan had some big, some good plays. Ken Talley was way better than I thought he
looked sturdy and quick. He had closing quickness.
Right, and then even Ruquan Buckley gets on the field for a few plays. So it's not like this is one of those games where you have a lot of guys participating because you're up by 30 points and guys start getting sprinkled in. These are guys that were given game reps in a meaningful situation with the game on the line, and that's what impressed me. And the fact that Rossi said, hey, we're going to play a lot of guys, and he was being honest about it. A lot of times, the last 3 years, even going all the way back to John L. Smith era, when you heard something from a guy on defense, you're skeptical. Right. Joe Rossi's a straight shooter.
I was surprised coming down the stretch covering preseason camp. I was like, is it me or do they have pretty good depth on defense? And the coaches would talk about it. And like Rossi said last week, we've got a lot of guys that have earned the right or have proven that they can play in games, and we're going to use them. And man, they did. And Buckley played a little bit. And that's a guy at Nebraska last year was only playing 5 or 6 snaps a game, if that, in some situations. They were using guys and getting that helped them in the fourth quarter. It can help them later in the season too. To think that they had to play basically the last 2 quarters of a close game without their starting safeties, if that would have happened any number of seasons previously, it would have been a huge problem. But they went out and got Nakai Martinez, and he wanted to come to Michigan State for whatever reason. Even though it was it was a little bit crowded, he wanted to come to Michigan State anyway. And they got him to come here, and they're happy they did. He made an impact today. And Gross played like a senior. That's a guy in the past that would get undressed and communication errors all the time. I'm blaming the system. I'm not blaming him. I said this a few times last year. It happened with so many players that at some point I stopped blaming the players.
There was one instance.
Ben Van Sumeren.
There was one instance today. It ended up being an overthrow where I thought Gross left his guy.
They had 2 busts.
And it could have burned him. But then again, I was saying this to Jake Laskawa, like at the height of the D'Antonio era, there's lots of times where people are like, hey, if that quarterback would have been just a little bit more accurate, he would have hit this guy downfield. That defense put up a lot of pressure today, and pressure does some things to you.
And think about how many times Gross was in the right place to make the play, because he's a sturdy football player, like Harlan Barnett used to say. But in this system now, he had the interception. He's just... Those talents are a little bit more easily correct now, and now he's playing correct, and I think it's the system, and we're seeing the real Angelo Gross.
The other guy that really impressed me is Ed Woods, man.
Yeah.
I mean, he had some plays, and he, like, for a guy that came from Arizona State, you don't think of Pac-12 football necessarily as being physical, but he got in there, even on that one fumble that he was right at the bottom of the pile, and. He had a sack today, I think, but he was pretty sturdy. He was a much better tackler, and like the things you always hear about, like when your defensive backs, your corners and your safeties, more like your corners. So when your corners are physical tacklers, that's kind of it tells you a lot about a defense. And the calling card of this defense today was physicality. I can't tell you how many times I looked out there today and I saw guys rallying to the football, guys that were under previous regime. You'd see guys standing around thinking their buddy got the tackle. I'm not going to throw my hat in there, and then all of a sudden something bounces out and it goes for a big play. Really good job by Michigan State's defense of rallying to the ball.
Yeah, and J.U. Colcrick, the color commentator, or the sideline commentator for the radio broadcast, he was noticing that on the sideline just a lot more guys rooting for each other than it's been in the recent years, which is understandable and not a surprise. He also pointed out, interestingly, that when Michigan State blew that timeout early in the second half, it's because the crowd noise was getting loud, and Cal Halliday couldn't get the verbal call in his helmet.
Right.
So they're going to learn about the whole helmet situation. They learned something there that sometimes their own crowd noise can mess up your calls. So the defense was not on the same page because of the crowd noise.
And that's why you've got guys signaling from the sideline as well.
Right. All right. So top to bottom, Michigan State trotting a lot of players out there. And we learned a lot about some of those guys, and it was fascinating in a lot of ways. I mean, the game ended up being a lot closer than Michigan State fans would have wanted, and if they would have lost, that would have just been horrible if they would have lost, obviously. But Michigan State was close to losing this game, but also close to pulling away and winning like a D'Antonio 27-3 type of game.
Right.
They were right there. So Chiles, of course, needs to iron those things out. Will that happen? How this season goes is going to be determined how he comes along. Because they're not going to be able to rely on defense like that and to play like that and hold a team to 9 points or whatever they scored, 10 points, when the opponents become better. Maryland next week, we'll be there checking that one out. And Michigan State did a lot of things today that leads you to believe they can win that game, but a lot of things need to be ironed out as well. Anything else, Paul?
I guess the one thing I'd say, just going back to the defense, there's some serious value for a defense and believing that it can win. It can shut teams down. And there's so many times like 4th down stoppages. In a game like this, as bad as it was for the offense, for the defense to come away time and time and time again, sudden change, 4th down stops, just after penalties, finding ways to get off the field. There's so much value to that self-belief aspect that comes with it. And you talk about guys rooting for each other. That comes with, knowing that there's a large playing group and everyone's going to have a role in this. And it also comes with the fact that you don't have coaches that are trying to set up these personal type battles and ready to throw guys under the bus for whatever reason. And I felt like, one of the problems with everything that went on during the Tucker era. A lot of guys got thrown to the curb, never to resurface.
Yeah.
You know, these
Disappear.
guys, these guys, 1 week they're on the coach's show, and you're talking about, talking them up like they're the next NFL draft pick. One mistake later, and you never hear from them again until there's 3 or 4 injuries at their position. And, so that communication piece that, hey, we're going to play a lot of guys. Everyone has a role. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Just make the corrections. There's honesty. There's obviously, I think, a lot of, players can trust their coaches. And there's a lot of value to that, in my opinion.
Yeah. As far as Chiles goes, I said in preseason, we're going to see whether he can make the reads. He has all the tools, but you don't know if someone can make all the reads till they get out here and do it. You don't know when you draft somebody in Major League Baseball, you don't know if they can hit the curveball till they see a Major League curveball. And also, I thought there might be a chance that he would have had that Noah Kim exuberance. I'm not comparing him to Noah Kim, other than Noah Kim did have some ability, but when he got his first start, he was overthrowing guys and missing throws that he knew he could make.
Right.
If you remember that opener. And now, Kim hadn't played a game in 3 or 4 years, had never been tackled for like 3 years. Chiles got a lot more work last year than Kim had previously. But I do think that Chiles, so fired up, I'm guessing, and all that horsepower, all those RPMs, might have led to some of those overthrows today. We'll see if he can calm down from that. They need him to. Need Chiles to come around, need that run game to come around. Right. Michigan State can't win a lot of games if they play like that in offense, obviously, the rest of the year. So they'll go back to work starting tomorrow and into Monday, and we'll be checking it out as they try to go 2-0 next week in Maryland. Is that about it, Paul? Mm-hmm. For Paul Konyndyk, my name is Jim Comparoni. I've been watching the VCast from Spartan Stadium with the Spartans for SpartanMag.com.